I know the topic was on China, Australia and threat of World War III and all that, but and by the way, the Pilger doco was on SBS last Sunday night, so you can still get it on iView for a fortnight if anyone hasn't seen The Coming War on China. Question mark. Korea. Are we dealing with North Korea specifically? Are we dealing with two possible megalomaniac leaders who might decide to up the ante? And will Australia face the same consequences that they would if it was a China-US splat instead? Specifically in that regard, all these little battleships that are chopping on their direction towards North Korea. I mean, it could happen any day now. I'd like your reflections on that and whether or not the Koreans have got any legitimate defence by saying that they're defending their national sovereignty as they have every day since the end of the Korean War.
Yeah, thanks for that. The Korean question is like, I mean, serious as it is, it's like an outlier from the main China question, which we were talking about earlier. What we're up against in North Korea at the moment is, it looks like a crisis, but in fact, it's the same familiar problem that we've had for years and years and years. At least since the late 1990s. Because what happened in 1994, the United States agreed with North Korea that in exchange for not progressing its development of nuclear reactors, the United States would supply, or rather, nuclear weapons program, the United States would supply power, bunker oil, and construction for a peaceful nuclear plant, which would, and they would take, the Koreans would take down anything else that they had. That went ahead for 6 years, right? Until there was a change of government, a change of regime in the regime, you might say, in the United States, and suddenly a right-wing Republican in control of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Congress said, we don't reward bad behavior. And the program for keeping the North Koreans out of nuclear weapons went out the window. And the North Koreans, naturally enough, people whose pride depends on standing up to the outside world, said, well, the hell with you. And they abandoned the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they got out of all the agreements that they had previously signed, and have continued on that path ever since. Now, the United States for a while had six-party talks with other countries, 3 on each side, which Australia, under Downer, tried hard to get into, but that would have unbalanced the table, and anyway, why should Australia be there since we would have only said what the United States said? So we didn't get in. And what really needs to happen with North Korea right now, and I hope that in fact, I vainly hope that it is happening quietly and we don't know about it. Doesn't matter that we don't know about it. It's better that it should happen than not at all. I hope that at some lower level in the system, the United States diplomats are now talking through Beijing to Pyongyang and saying, now look guys, this is too serious for us to muck around with. What can we do to sort it out? That is my hope. I have no confidence that it's actually happening, but it's what needs to happen. And it has to happen quietly because both sides have got so much hubris invested in this nonsense. But the costs of getting it wrong are so huge that it just must be done. I don't know if Trump is smart enough, or the people who work with him are smart enough to work this out, since they don't even know where their ships are. And since they don't seem to understand that a nuclear war is end of story for everybody. Whether they get this or not, I don't know. But that's what the key is with North Korea. And I would wish, just to add a coda to this, which I didn't mention before, I would wish that Australia had put itself in such a position of independence that we could actually act as an honest broker in such a discussion and be able to go in to both sides and say, look, we will convene some meetings here to talk about our differences and sort them out in a rational fashion, as we did, for instance, in Cambodia years ago, when there was an awful situation going on there, and where Australia did a huge effort, a sort of physical effort of running around the relevant capitals, talking to people and saying, come, look, let's get elections up in Cambodia. You know, the outcome is another thing, but let's get some elections held in Cambodia. And we did it. Not only that, we did the same thing in East Timor. Now, we did it to some extent with some success in the Solomon Islands. Australia is good at doing this stuff, as long as the Americans are not involved. Because as soon as the Americans are involved, we go to bits, because, you know, and we don't have our own voice, but we can do it given the chance. And I would wish that we had more distance between the various players and could do the kind of thing that you're suggesting about North Korea.
Okay, next.
Alison, I was interested in your talk about the prime ministerial powers to declare war and the ANZUS Treaty. My recollection from school history 100 years ago was that Menzies wasn't said at the beginning of the Second World War, Britain has declared war on Germany and consequently we are at war also. Without any treaties of ANZUS or any formal treaties that bound us to do that at all, he just said we're at war and we were. So in a sense, it's a question of a prime ministerial power. So is it really whether has the Prime Minister the ability to do that just because he bullies the Cabinet and there's nothing that says he can't? Does that precedent become relevant? Does the changes supposedly made by Downer and that you're saying Downer and Howard made on the plane, can they simply arbitrarily change the ANZUS Treaty in the sense that the Prime Minister does what he or she likes and goes ahead? And how is that challengeable by either the High Court or the Parliament, in the sense that what are the constraints on what the Prime Minister and the Executive can do? I mean, the assumption is that they will do, that they are put there as a sort of head of a pyramid, if you like, but no one, you know, the Cabinet is the pyramid of the Parliament and the Prime Minister is the pyramid of the Cabinet. And so in a sense there's an accountability because you got to the top of the pyramid, but it's not a formal definition of roles as you might have as your in your job as a gardener or something. You shall do this and shall do that, and may not do that. I mean, how can that be challenged? I mean, and is Kirby's reply simply it's too hard for the High Court to take on the Prime Minister? Is that what he was saying? And or are there grounds that you believe, legal grounds, that could have defined this role either within ANZUS or without it?
And did Menzies go to the Governor General in Council before saying we're at war?
No, he didn't. And here's the difference. Menzies said that Australia was automatically at war because this was before the UN Charter, don't forget. This was in was it 39 or 41?
39.
39. And as far as Menzies was concerned, and it was true, Australia was a dominion, and the task of dominions was to send troops to the wars of the metropolitan power. That was understood. There was, and in fact, it was reflected in the Australian Constitution, and if the Governor-General was consulted, and it was a Brit, that person would automatically have signed off on such a thing. It's an interesting question actually as to whether Menzies did consult the Governor-General, but the record shows that they had about a 15-minute consultation between him and his ministers when they heard that Britain was at war, and there was no question. Australia was at war, that was it, and he announced it. Whether he advised the Governor-General and the Governor-General assented, in fact, being the lawyer he was, I suppose that's what he did. But there was no discussion. Now, the difference between that and what took place after you get the UN saying what the rules of aggression actually are is quite profound. And Menzies had a lot of trouble adjusting to that because it put him at odds with the British allegiance that he was so attracted to and the dependence on the United States that he had to rely upon. And so he kept saying that, this is funny, Australia doesn't have to choose between Britain and the United States. Isn't that funny? He kept saying it in the 1960s, you know, when he's coming to the end of his prime ministership, in just the way that subsequent prime ministers have said Australia doesn't have to choose between the United States and China. And in both cases, they were wrong, because he did have to choose, and we do have to choose, as I've argued tonight. But now, as far as going to war is concerned, it is a matter of law, but law is ignored increasingly. In international law is just bypassed. It's as though it doesn't exist. The Trump administration appears to not know the first thing about it, nor to give it the slightest concern, except that it applies to other, they made it. It applies to other people. They have to abide by it, and if they don't, they get criticised. But the United States can do what it bloody well likes. Now, the only thing that stands between Australia and chaos is adherence to international law, and yet we ourselves are flouting it in Syria, where we are engaged in an illegal war. Because, did the Syrian government invite us? No. Are we defending Australia from immediate attack? No. So what are we doing? We're committing a crime of aggression by bombing in Syria. And Julie Bishop, who's a lawyer and should know better, says that we are attacking Islamic State because it has breached boundaries between Iraq and Syria, and we can attack them wherever they are. She's made this up on the run. And she's got compliant lawyers in AGs who tell her this is okay. It's not okay, and the only thing that stands between us and total law of the jungle is this sort of behaviour. This hasn't answered your question, but the only reason that I mentioned the Governor-General earlier is that we in war powers reform are clinging to whatever we can find that stands between the power of the Prime Minister to do as he or she likes and these disastrous wars.
Could I just query legally one of the things you said? Australia signed the Statute of Westminster in 1931, which repealed British Imperial Powers Act implications for Australia's local law. But
No,
I
we
don't
didn't.
think
We were offered it in 31 and we didn't sign it.
We signed it, but we didn't ratify
Not in 31, we
it.
didn't.
We didn't ratify it till 39.
That's right.
No, didn't ratify till Labor government of 1941. But this gentleman's got a question, so let's go back there. Just say your name first.
Alison.
Hold it right up to your mouth.
Alison, we've been talking about Australia and America attacking people or going to war illegally. I'd like you to spend a bit of time on the situation with Israel. Now, Israel has attacked many countries by there without any form of voting or permission from anybody, and have never even been challenged by even the United Nations.
And it's where the rot started.
Particularly not by the United States.
But it's where the rot started in respect to the disregard of international law.
We used to have an American diplomat, academic here at University of Sydney. I've forgotten his name, and I never forget that when he left Australia in despair, he said that until the question of Palestine is resolved, nothing will be resolved. And this was 3 decades ago, and I sort of put it into my rote memory, and he was absolutely right. Now, Australia's behaviour in relation to Israel and Palestine is the most checkered of all careers that you could possibly imagine. Have a look at, it's really interesting to see what Bob Carr says about that in his memoir, and how he fought with Julia Gillard over it. Julia Gillard, like heaps of other Australian politicians, have had wonderful tours to Israel and have been feted and blandished and had a great time. And Israel is a lovely country, and it's fascinating, and its history appealed enormously to people like Bob Hawke, brought up a Christian, go to the Holy Land, etc., all that stuff. And it evokes the sort of deep inner identity stuff that some people are imbued with. Not me, I have to say, but some are, and that's how they are. But what Bob Hawke is describing in his memoir is how he fought with Gillard because she wanted...
Bob Carr, you mean?
Sorry, thank you, Bob Carr. How he fought with her over changing Australia's vote in the UN. Now, he won for that moment, but it has since been reversed. And we have gone back to joining this tiny little group of marginalised countries that will not agree that the Palestinians deserve their own statehood. And you can say what you like about, the right of Israel to exist, which has been already agreed a very long time ago, but the right of Palestine to exist is the collateral for that. And just as huge numbers of countries in the General Assembly agree about climate change and nuclear disarmament, huge numbers in the United Nations agree about Palestine. And Australia finds itself again and again, to my acute embarrassment, isolated with a voting group that includes the United States, Israel, the Federated States of Micronesia, and Palau.
Wow.
Talk about client state.
Yeah.
I mean, this is embarrassing. And how Australia can dig itself out of this hole, well, how it can, is by changing that vote. We don't even have to vote affirmative, we can abstain, but at the moment we vote negative. Let us hope we can move forward. But on all of these issues, Australia is falling way behind reasonable countries, including Canada and New Zealand. We're looking more and more isolated. And there are people in Israel, as you would know, who wish for this kind of international support and who are devastated about what their government is doing and how cynically they are increasing the settlements and spreading the control of the territory in ways that are so devastating for the Palestinian people. You can say whatever you like about the lack of support from their fellow Arabs that the Palestinians are getting, and that is a shame. But that's not for us to deal with. We have to deal with our own stuff.
Okay. Who's next? You go on the list next. Hang on. You come back. We'll come back to you.
Oh, thank you, Alison, for a very interesting discussion tonight. Graham Palis is my name. I'd just like to assure the crowd that, in contrast to the Americans, Australia knows where its warships are. The new Canberra and Adelaide are stuck at Garden Island due to major engine problems and will not sail this year. The other part of the...
I'm glad to hear it.
That's straight from the Navy's mouth. The other question I have, of course, in the ANZUS conundrum is how little New Zealand figures in any situation due to their wisdom. I mean, they can throw their chests out in the rugby world, but where throwing your chest out is not productive, they appear to have a much better sense of occasion than we do. Any comments?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I didn't know about the fact that we are so navally endangered at this moment. My God, no one's defending us. The New Zealanders, as we all know, are something else. Every morning we go to Bondi and we have a Kiwi mate down there who has a swimsuit with a fern on it and kiwi on the back and the whole bit, and she lives here. But she's just been back there and telling us how prosperous it is and how Germans are there buying up real estate and how wonderful, you know. You're immediately tempted to say, well, why don't you go back? But in the United Nations, for instance, the New Zealand delegation works twice as hard as we do, and for all the right causes. In fact, Helen Clark could well have been Secretary General had politics been otherwise, and quite possibly should have been. Would have been wonderful to have a woman, and she would have been a good woman. The New Zealanders have a capacity to understand international connections and how to use them in a way that we only talk about. They actually do it, and they're good at doing it. And for instance, they bring out a thing called the New Zealand Blue Book every year in New York, which gives everybody everything they need to know about the United Nations. Every delegate needs the New Zealand Blue Book to find out, you know, who's on what committee, what the rules are, you know, all the detail, the sort of nitty-gritty detail. The New Zealanders put that together, and it's such a good PR thing for them, because not only do they have to do the work, and that concentrates their mind, but it also publicises New Zealand as a concerned citizen. Now, New Zealand is on the Security Council at the moment, taking over from us in our particular voting group, and I can't tell you, in fact I should, it would have been good to have looked this up but I didn't, how their performance has compared to ours, but my guess would be that the New Zealanders, because they got themselves out of ANZUS, are much less constrained by American agendas than we are, and that's their trick. They have worked out how to survive without being a satrap of the American alliance in the way that we are. And this is what we should be thinking about doing, and the Canadians are doing the same.
Excuse me, does that mean that ANZUS no longer includes New Zealand?
Sorry, my hearing's really shot.
That means that ANZUS no longer include New Zealand.
It doesn't formally. They have been shut off from some things. They are not any longer a formal member of the alliance. They're still sort of persona grata with the United States, but we pass on to them the intelligence that we reckon they need, that we would otherwise have got for what it's worth from the United States. And to the extent that ANZUS is an intelligence operation, I don't think the New Zealanders appear to have suffered at all. And the one thing they don't have is bases anywhere in their country and visits by whatever kind of ships, nuclear armed or otherwise. And they have made their point. And some people would say, well, that's all right, they're going to be defended by us, whatever happens to them. And probably that is also their calculation. If so, it's rational.
They're still part of the five-power defence arrangement, though.
They are.
No one
Hang on,
is
hang on.
going to
Your
invade
turn.
New Zealand, for Christ's sake.
Your turn. You go for your question now. Okay.
I've actually thought that there was an abstention back there by Australia in respect to one of the so-called resolutions in regard to Palestine very recently, rather than a rejection.
I don't know about that. Tell me what that is.
I can't remember what it was, but I had thought that that we had actually slipped into an abstention.
I think that's right.
That was the Labor.
Really something historically.
The Labor government.
It was astounding that they'd actually had the gumption and
Yeah, that was
fought-
something-
Oh, you mean under the previous government?
No,
Our previous-
our government
This government.
had voted an abstention rather than a rejection.
Well, I'm very glad to hear it, but I didn't know that had happened.
First time.
No, not the
yeah.
first time, but I'm glad they've done it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was under Carter.
It was under Carr, wasn't it?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking more recently. Yeah, it was done under Carr, yeah, of course. That's where Carr won. He had a big fight with Gillard over that, and he succeeded in getting us, yes, that's the point. I thought you were talking more recently about something I hadn't heard of. But no, he did that. And then it was reversed.
It was reversed.
Yeah.
Later, yeah, by, of course, the fact that
Abbott.
Abbott won government,
Yeah.
and then the whole performance went back to the way it was. That was what happened.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were telling me something new.
Come on. Yeah.
Yeah, just say that there's no hope in hell of there ever being a two-state solution. It's way, way, way beyond that. They've only left something like 7% of historic Palestine for the Palestinians.
I know. I know.
A lot, an awful lot or the vast majority of the so-called history
Yeah.
and archaeology of so-called Israel is fabricated by Jewish Zionist
Yeah,
archaeologists, that sort of thing.
yeah, you're right.
And until they get it together, then it's just going to remain a festering wound.
Well, you're quite right.
And it's a gross insult to Muslim culture across the planet, which is why we've got this horrible bloody mess that's happening at the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. As I said, that.
Read Alan Patte.
Yeah. I know. That American academic whose name I've forgotten said exactly what you're saying, and he said unless this is resolved, this is going to go on and on. And no matter what is being done around various regimes in the region, the fundamental question of Palestine is at the heart of the whole thing, as you say.
Yes.
And it goes all the way back to 1947.
And it's the rot that's
1917.
destroying the
Yeah.
entire structure of
1917.
international
Yes, indeed.
law.
I know, it's
Yeah.
appalling.
Yeah, the culture of international law is
Quite so.
dissipated.
Okay, who's next?
Quite so.
Is anyone else? Go, Charles.
Because of
I've actually got two questions, Chair. Both related to what might be done. If I may sort of generalise it to Australian civil society with an interest or with an involvement with foreign affairs. First one I'd like to perhaps comment on, and you commented on with regard to the High Court. There's a question mark there about what the High Court, how the High Court would see an appeal under the Constitution. And that story about the gathering of all the envoys, where they were sat down and talked about, well, yes, there were breakouts, but at the same token, it's sort of, what I'm getting at, I sense a degrading of our institutions, our public institutions. It's across, in my view, it's across every department, and both in state and federal. The neoliberal process of gutting the experts and installing not even party hacks, but self-interested folk to give the minister advice rather than the fearless advice that there was a lot of before.
It is depressing, I agree. One of the things that led to this current situation is a long time ago, the fact that the Menzies government went on for so long and its successors hung on for a few more years after that meant that what we now call the coalition had been ruling Australia for nearly 3 decades. That meant that people who had risen to positions of power in the public service, which was supposed to be an independent institution, had never had to do anything or say anything that the government didn't agree with. This was called frank and fearless advice, because they had no problem with it. When Whitlam came in, he didn't trust a single one of them. They demanded that he put his staff through security checks, and he refused because his staff wouldn't have passed them, and a lot of them. And that then meant that we had this fundamental political change in who advised government and who didn't. And the people who advised Whitlam were the true believers. Then after that, the whole game was really lost, because Whitlam put people he trusted into positions of power naturally, because he wouldn't put those other people who'd been there for 3 decades, who hated his guts and didn't want him to be there. And so the apoliticisation, so-called, of the public service was gone. It was further killed off, if you like, when Howard started, came straight into government and sacked 6 heads of departments, which meant that what used to be called permanent heads They used to be called permanent heads, and there was a good reason for that, which you would have learnt if you watched your Yes Minister, that the public service must rule while governments come and go. No, the reverse occurred. Governments came and went, but permanent heads and people in senior positions in the public service went with them. And so that has resulted in the situation you now have, where frank and fearless advice, forget it. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen at all. And the growth around prime ministers of trusted advisors who aren't even members of the public service, and huge departments of their own, which leave the actual, what used to be quite powerful departments out there in limbo, is very serious. And the most enfeebled department, I would say, is Foreign Affairs. Foreign Affairs is a shadow of what it was under, say, Richard Walcott. Walcott says now that Foreign Affairs is a department of process, not of policy. It doesn't even advise on policy. So when these heads of mission come back and talk, they don't even talk about policy. They just, I said to somebody, what did they do then? He said, they were glad to get back and see their mates. Now this is what you get when the foreign policy is bipartisan, like that, and foreign policy is dictated in Washington. So there is no real debate about foreign policy at all in Australia, none. And no wonder we find ourselves in the dangerous situation we do, because we have no capacity to develop an alternative. There are no people working on alternatives. People get rewarded for reinforcing the status quo, nothing else. And that's why the kinds of interviews you hear with Julie Bishop, Penny Wong, her too, and our Defence Minister, Maurice Payne, are so lacking in content. There is no content. And the worst thing of all, just to send you off really happy, the worst thing of all is that used to make some sense when we had a man of some intelligence in the White House. Not anymore.
What about the Lowy Institute and the think tanks?
Charles, got another question.
What?
Yes, hang on. Yes.
It's part of the same problem, mate.
It's related, and my acknowledgement is that I'm not the only member of the Labor Party in the room, but a member of the Labor Party with a particular interest in what is needed to break that nexus and the stupidity of just giving you embarrassment to foreign affairs. So, you can't come to me, doesn't a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but it's still left to the in terms of program development and policy development discussion. What can the Labor Party, what can I move up in the Labor Party that would really shake it up? Evidence,
Well, I understand that the Labor Party is, as they often do, saying they're going to give a lot more attention to the opinions of branches and, feed. Somebody's laughing there. Yeah. Feedback from the rank and file and so on and so on. And we have all heard that before. But, I get the impression, here's a specific answer to your question. I got the impression from listening to Penny Wong that she would have to wait for your next federal conference to get change in certain aspects of foreign policy. And until then, she has to abide by the party line. Now, that I can understand. I do wish there was a bit more flexibility and creativity and so on, that you wouldn't have to wait for so long for something to change in response to changing a rapidly changing world.
I'm already working on that.
And good. And what I hope you and your group are going to do is put up, as you have to,
My group.
good lines for the foreign policy platform that take account of the kinds of things we've been discussing tonight, in particular Palestine, but other things as well, particularly nuclear disarmament, another one.
Yes.
And put real flesh on those bones and make sure that they don't get themselves tied down to some negotiated platform that doesn't mean anything and doesn't get anywhere, and loses them the opportunity they've got of winning the next election, let's face it.
My 5-point statement would be a good start.
Okay.
That's online.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just nearly the end of the time, I've got a quick question, I think. I've been watching both Maurice Payne and some other ministers. They've said, I think Julie Bishop, they've said, so far the United States hasn't given us a request. This is about the South China Sea and about North Korea. So what does it mean, you know, in diplomatic talk? What's going on when they say those words?
I don't believe them. It probably is true that the United States hasn't given them a request, but that actually, it's turning it round. What they mean is, we haven't yet told the United States to request us to send whatever it is that we decide we want to send and the US wants. So it goes backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards like this. And in every case that I've investigated, going right back to Menzies with Vietnam, and even earlier, when we offered something, I found another great one the other day, when we claimed the US wanted something, but it was us who proposed it. This is the way it happens every time, and that is what these words mean. I am almost certain that what they're doing is they're trailing their coat and they're saying, get ready for it, people. We are offering more commitments. Now, if this means to Syria, then we all ought to be ready to say, what is the legality of that? The United States may well say, we want more support in Syria, but that is us attacking a sovereign country. The sovereign country hasn't requested it, that's for sure. We are not being attacked, that's for sure. And therefore, it's a crime of aggression.
Why doesn't the legal establishment speak up about that?
Indeed. Why?
It's just a complete vacuum.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, it drives me crazy.
It's so blatant, it's ludicrous. And no one who's supposed to be embedded to criticise that manner of behaviour is prepared to do it.
And the Murdoch media won't touch it with a barge pole.
Okay, we should wind up, but you've got a comment or a question?
Just a question. I'm a little confused from your talk in the last comment there. You said that the US had asked us, and you had a whole lot of examples in Grenada and places I'd never heard of where they'd asked us and we'd said no. I mean, are you saying in all those cases, because I know in Vietnam we asked them to ask us.
That's right.
Apparently in Syria they actually asked us, or that may have been that we asked them and then they asked us.
Who did?
Are you saying in all cases we ask them and then we ask them to ask us, and in all these Grenada and all these piddly little places nobody had heard of, in all those cases did we ask them to ask us and they failed to do so? Surely not.
No.
What is the
No,
situation?
if I gave you that impression, that's not right. We just stayed away from those, and the United States didn't ask us. So we didn't We just, except Kamoy and Matsu, they asked us and we said no. But all those other little wars that I mentioned, Grenada, etc., we just, if anything was raised, we said we weren't interested. But we certainly didn't trail our coat to be asked. But the ones where we trailed our coat to be asked, we always got asked. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing now.
Okay.
Just one
quickly, Jefferson. It's on. It's on.
It's on. No, it's not.
You turned it off. Okay.
I'm pretty loud.
Go ahead.
First of all, Alison, thanks for a wonderful talk, but you were looking for the name, I think, of William McMahon Ball, the former head of government at Sydney University, BALL. I think he could be the academic who was there for 20 or 30 years, or maybe someone else. But my quick question is...
No, it's not him. Go ahead.
I thought Australia had already committed itself to send ships into the so-called Chinese zone in the South China Sea, where there have built these Air Force bases. I thought we were sending commercial ships there to push them to tell us to get out of their zone of influence or maritime boundary zone. I thought we'd already done that about 2 years ago when they were still constructing the bases.
Well, they've been constructing them for a long time, and we've got commercial ships going through there all the time as well. So it's not a matter of saying we're doing it in order to create any effect. The fact is that this construction is continuing, and there is nothing that anybody can do about it. If they want to fortify these islands and militarize them, as you might say, they will. And do you know what? All of the islands that China claims are also claimed by Taiwan. And for all those years that they were claimed by Taiwan, we had not the slightest problem with it. Isn't it funny that we suddenly have a problem with it when the United States doesn't like China doing it? And furthermore, they've got 8. The Vietnamese have got heaps more islands that they claim. And the whole thing is now being dealt with outside the headlines. Unilaterally, one country and another talking to China, which is what China wanted all the way along. They didn't want to have to deal with ASEAN as a whole because that gives them a disadvantage in negotiation. And what they're actually doing is speaking to each of the countries involved unilaterally, or rather bilaterally, and saying, okay, what is your problem? And you've noticed that the Philippines is flipping and flopping both ways because they know perfectly well they can't defend themselves. However, they and the Vietnamese have got significant fishing concerns, and they are negotiating them very successfully with the Chinese, but you wouldn't know this from the media that we read in Australia. They are doing it. And this is exactly the same approach that Australia should be using if we had any territorial problems in the South China Sea, which we don't, or if we had any access for our shipping problems, which we don't. Why? Because the Chinese need our shipping to go through the South China Sea, and why we should be making a fuss about it is only because the United States wants to fight.
Peter, before you end, could you give us the details where we can get a recording of this off the internet, and also the details of the IPAN demonstration on Saturday and the AFANET dinner with my sister coming up late May?
The AFANET dinner is a bit far away, but okay, first of all we should thank Dr. Alison Broinowski for another fantastic presentation tonight.